Welcome to the Chloe Davis story, Part 3. I'll be reading from 2 articles. One was written by newspaperwoman Adela Rogers St. and published on April 7, 1940. The other was written by a psychiatrist by the name of W. Henry Messenkoff, or that was a pseudonym for someone else. It was published in Crime Detective magazine, July 1940. I'll start with the opening editorial statement of the magazine article, jump to the St. John's article, and then to the Psychiatrist. The demons were after Mother. Editor's note: the tragedy which ended the lives of 4 members of the family of Barton Davis in Los Angeles has aroused a storm of conjecture throughout the nation. The editors of Crime Detective present a psychiatrist's explanation of the case, written exclusively for this magazine by Dr. W. Henry Messenkoff. Editorial beginning. What happened? At 9:30 on the morning of April 4th, 1940, Barton Davis was summoned to the telephone by the cashier in the market where he was employed. His daughter Chloe, 11, asked him to come home. When Davis arrived at his home in West Los Angeles, he found Chloe in the front yard. The little girl was dressed for school. Her face shone from a recent scrubbing, but there was an ugly wound above her left eye. Chloe made non-committal replies to her father's questions and suggested he go inside and look around. 2 minutes later, Barton Davis burst from the house weeping hysterically and calling for help. When police arrived, they found the nude body of Mrs. Lolita Davis, 36, lying on a mattress in a narrow hallway leading from the front room to the bedrooms. Her hair and nightdress had been burned. Blood streamed from numerous wounds on her head. On the floor of the kitchen, they found the bodies of Marquis, 3, and Deborah Ann, 7. A bloody hammer was on the floor nearby. The body of Daphne, 10, was found in the bathtub. The walls and even the ceilings were covered with blood stains. There were bloody footprints on the floors and rugs, and a second hammer with a broken handle was found near the body of Mrs. Davis. When the ambulance driver arrived ahead of police, it was Chloe who took him inside the house. Without any show of emotion, the little girl pointed to the kitchen floor. "That's my little brother. He isn't moving anymore. And," she continued, indicating that body of Deborah Ann, "that's my sister. She still moves sometimes." Chloe then led the man past her mother's body in the hallway to the bathroom. "That's my sister, Daphne, and she's moving sometimes, too." Chloe Davis story. "I was asleep when I heard a lot of racket and got up to see what it was all about. I guess the other kids were up because I'm lazy or sleepy or something, and I never get up when the other kids do. I asked Mother what was going on, and she told me the demons were after us all, and that she was going to kill us kids and then kill herself. Mother said she was going to kill me too," Chloe continued. "She thought she had killed her aunt's daughter, Patsy Thompson, about 3 years ago, and that she'd killed other people. She said she was going to get paid back for killing her, and us kids would get paid back too. Then Mother started hitting at me with a hammer. She conked me on my head. I fought back and got the hammer away from her. I couldn't run because the doors were locked. Mother lit some matches and tried to set my hair on fire. It wouldn't burn, and she set fire to her own. Her nightie burned off. Mother told me to hit her on the head and keep on hitting her until she couldn't talk. She told me to hit her ribs, so I hit her in the side or maybe in the stomach. I didn't want to do that, so I started conking her on the head again. Her head was harder, and I didn't mind hitting her there as much as in the body. I guess I hit her about 20 times. Then the head of the hammer came off. I was tired and thirsty, so I got a glass of water. Marquis was groaning something terrible, and I asked Mother what to do. She said to get the hammer out of the playroom and hit him with it. I did, and he stopped groaning. Mother stopped breathing and talking, so I changed my clothes and washed up. Then I called Daddy." This is the title of the St. John's article. Chloe Davis, incredible, unreal, declares Adela Rogers St. John's. Adela Rogers St. One of the nation's best-known writers, yesterday interviewed Chloe Davis for The Examiner. Mrs. St. John's started newspaper work in Los Angeles as the daughter of the late Earl Rogers, foremost criminal lawyer in the West. As a newspaper woman and writer for national magazines, she has covered many celebrated criminal cases, but none, she admits, as incredible and terrific in its aspects as this one. Here's her story. Stubby child hands with bitten fingernails clutched the handkerchief I offered. A bandaged head with unkempt pigtails went down on my shoulder, and I held in my arms the most pitiful and terrible figure I had ever seen in my life. Chloe Davis, 11 years old, is incredible, unreal, unbelievable, no matter how the facts of this crime, in which her mother and her sisters and her brother met death, may read in the end. When you talk to her, you talk to a stocky, plump little girl, feet in scuffed buckskin shoes not touching the floor, blue sweater over a yellow dress just like any one of 1,000 kids you see going to school every day, nibbling chocolate bars and licking her fingers that only a few hours ago were red and dripping with, no, it can't be real. While I squeezed her, tight sobs shook against me, and I knew that this was a child who had walked through a bloody hell that makes old police reporters shudder, and that the shock that has frozen her for hours since she struck that last blow is wearing off. To me, in our hour-long talk, she said things fantastic, things sweeping from horror and tragedy to little girl jokes and ordinary kid talk, until I felt my heart beginning to hammer in an attempt to make this murder and her part in it real. It can't be real. It can't have happened. Either way, whether she herself, this blonde little girl with icy eyes, went mad in some twisted fashion and committed the whole deed herself, or whether, even more unreal and horrible, her own story is true and she finished the dreadful deed her mother had begun, either way, there is about the story an unreality that smothers you in a nightmare, and you sit paralyzed, bound, trying to scream for help the way you do in a nightmare, and no sound comes. There is something wrong with Chloe Davis, with the monstrosity of whatever she did, something wrong with a world that has so much blood in it that it seeps through into the lives and minds of children. There's a hole in her white socks. Yes, that's right, ordinary hole. There's a blister on her thumb, blister from a hammer she wielded. Yes, that's right too. Chloe Davis speaks always in the present tense. Not too far away lie the bodies of her mother, of her 2 sisters so close to her in age, of her baby brother. 2 of those deaths, at least by her own story, she brought about. All of them she saw dead. Yet she says in a high, ordinary little girl voice, "My mummy doesn't read much. She never reads out loud to me," she says. "Oh sure, I love my little brother. He is a kind of cute kid, but he's awful spoiled. I guess that's natural when he's the littlest and a boy. Daphne's 10. She's nearest my age. We could play together most," she says with a crooked smile. The smile comes easily enough. Debbie's a nuisance, but my mummy likes her best. She's pretty." Always the present tense, until at last I said, "But Chloe, you realize that it's all over? That you and your daddy will have to live alone now?" "We won't," said Chloe. Then the sudden twist of the mouth that, until she broke and began to cry, just as we drove up to Juvenile Hall, was her only sign of pain. "I won't like that. I can't think." There was one thing. There had to be one thing that must be asked. The one question that staggers Captain Edgar Edwards, the kindly gray-haired detective who stands, too, appalled by the unreality of this crime. The one fact that has driven many of the detectives with whom I talked today to utter bewilderment, that has made many people believe that Chloe herself did all these murders. How could she have done the things she said she did? How could she have gone on, hitting her mother until the hammer broke? I saw that hammer. How could an 11-year-old child use it as Chloe says she did? I mean, we're human beings. How could she have struck the final blows? Her little brother, her mother. Why didn't she run screaming out of that house when she says she came out and found them there and her mother attacked her? I asked her. I said, "Chloe, you must see why we're so puzzled and bewildered. Why didn't you run? Why didn't you run and scream for help and maybe save Mark and your mother?" She pushed her hand across her forehead, a gesture she uses often. Maybe the bandaged head aches. Maybe she is trying to remember. I don't think she remembers everything. She can't. If she did, she would go mad. "I can't tell you why I didn't run," she said. "You see, I came out, all that squealing, and that room was full of blood and smoke. You never saw so much blood. It got all over me." "Didn't it make you sick?" I said. "How did you know? Didn't it make you sick?" The nausea began to creep up and get me by the throat then. "Oh, I've seen lots of blood," Chloe said. Just then, for the first time, she turned and looked full at me. Her eyes came up to me. It isn't imagination because I know about that child. It isn't. Her eyes are set wide apart. They are set in enormous sockets, and they aren't blue or gray. They are blue and gray shot with yellow, and they aren't quite right. They are icy. The rest of her face flushes. Her mouth twists the way a child's mouth does in pain. You've seen it, but the eyes are wrong. They stop. Whether or not that is shock, I don't know. I don't know what her eyes were like before she looked upon that chambers in her little home where she lived. I've seen lots of blood. I've seen an awful automobile accident in Michigan. 2 cars. There was blood all over everything. I saw lots of accidents, and I cut my own leg, see? There was a long white scar down the stocky little leg. The house was full of blood and smoke and squeals, Chloe's words. Then her mother hit her with a hammer and something happened. The sights, the sounds, the smells, they went through some weak spot in that 11-year-old brain. They sent her into some madness of unreality. That must be it. That must be the way it happened, because you see, Chloe still talks about Mummy in the present tense. She still expects, she told me so, somehow in her imagination, she still expects to go back and find the clean little house, and find her spoiled little brother, and her sisters, and Mummy. That is the way I read it, although when you see it all, that seems almost more abnormal than if Chloe herself in some childish, insane anger had done it all herself. It seems more awful that she should have been able to go on, cold-blooded. Conscience, you see, it's unreal. You and your mother, you hesitate, you're afraid to say the words. You and your mother got along well. You loved her, and after all, you were the oldest, and you must have helped her a lot around the house and all that. Sure, Chloe said. I can cook. I don't know if I can cook good, but I can cook. But Mummy didn't like me best. I can tell you that. Not much, she didn't. Well, I said, stumbling on my own words, maybe you just thought she liked her only son best, the littlest. Oh no, said Chloe. She didn't like Mark best. She liked Debbie best. Deborah was her pet. Then Mark, and then Daphne, and then me. Were you hurt by that sometimes? Did it make you unhappy? Maybe here we might find something that had gone deep, driven a child into some peculiar savage world of jealousy and revenge. Yeah, it hurt. Sometimes it hurt plenty. But I never did anything about it. Not for a while, I didn't. Not for a while? Did that mean that she had, at least with a hammer, when you did what your mother told you to do, with the matches and the hammer. You know what it is to be hypnotized? As though you were forced to do that and couldn't do anything else? Was it that way, or were you trying to help your mother out of her pain?" "The house was full of blood and smoke," Chloe said, taking another bite of her chocolate bar. "But you see, then there wasn't any smoke in the house. Perhaps her memory is scrambled on that, runs in together. I was like in a daze. I just did it. I don't know why. I wanted to get cleaned up. It was such a mess. My mummy was so pretty. Why, I had a girlfriend named Bonnie, and she thought my mother was prettiest of anybody, and she told her mother so, and was her mother sore." She laughed out loud. "You can see, Chloe," I said, "why we can't believe, why it seems strange to us that a little girl could go on and do—" Chloe looked at me. The untidy pigtails, the mouth smeared with chocolate, the icy eyes blank. "It seems strange to you?" she said. "I guess it seems strangest of all to me, of anybody." Those were her exact words. "But you haven't cried," I said. "You're such a little girl, and you haven't cried. They told me—" "That's what they think," said Chloe. "I'm crying all the time. I haven't ever stopped crying. I'm crying all the time inside. It don't do you any good to cry when they can see you. It don't get you anywhere. I'm crying all the time inside." Then she was crying in my arms, and I was trying to fight my way back to reality, to what had happened to this 11-year-old child. There were so many other strange things she told me about the Indians and how she wanted to be born a little Indian girl. Somewhere, we've got to find the truth of this story for the sake of other children. As a Psychiatrist Sees It, by W. Henry Messenkopf. The motives which drive one human being to take the life of another are rarely easy to understand. When the murderer vents his destructive rage on those nearest and dearest to him, his actions become more difficult to comprehend. The physical evidence in the Barton Davis family tragedy requires little interpretation. But in order to catalog the mysterious forces which decreed that horrible orgy of destruction, we must subject the physical and mental background of the principles involved to the most minute examination. It is not necessary that we should follow the police investigation, except to note two important facts. 1. Mrs. Lolita Davis had a long history as a chronic invalid, and her physicians had recommended she see a psychiatrist. 2. The home life of the Davis family, although clouded by the mother's illness, had been a happy one. In exploring the history of the mother, it was quickly established that she had complained to her husband of demons who were threatening the family, and she had talked of committing suicide. These facts substantiated Chloe's recital of events. Before the autopsy, the little girl made one addition to her story. She said her mother had ordered her to get a razor blade from the closet shelf, and that her mother had used the blade to slash her own wrists. The medical examiner determined that Mrs. Davis had actually died from a loss of blood through these wounds, and the 3 children as a result of the blows inflicted on their heads. If we are to reconstruct the fateful events of that morning, we must of necessity accept one of 2 possibilities. Chloe's story seems reasonable if we disregard the official suspicion of her manner of telling it. To follow this course, we must be willing to refrain from comparing her attitude with what may be our preconceived notions of normal behavior under similar circumstances. The other possibility is to accept the police theory that Chloe, in a fit of maniacal rage, might have killed her mother and the children. Although horrible to contemplate, this is not so impossible as it would seem. The theory that insanity is hereditary has been largely exploded. But we know Mrs. Davis was mentally ill, and the children of the insane frequently inherit a tendency for their parents' trouble. The great psychologist, Dr. Sigmund Freud, has given us the term Electra complex, which might be applicable in this case. The tragedy of Electra may be found in Greek mythology. She drove her brother to take vengeance on their mother because she thought the mother had not been faithful to their father. In modern psychology, the term is used to describe a person who is jealous of one parent for the love and attention of the other parent. Clinical history contains records of many cases where boys with a strong love for their mothers have resented the father's attention to his wife, and of girls who have resented each caress their mothers bestowed on their fathers. According to police doctors, Chloe has a physical and mental development well beyond her years. They picture her as a precocious child with a phlegmatic temperament. This is the description of a sadistically inclined person. It is not difficult to remember numerous recent cases where sadists killed for a thrill. Those which come readily to mind are the sadistic killers Leopold and Loeb, who murdered little Bobby Franks in Chicago and stuffed his body in a drain; William Edward Hickman, who kidnapped Marion Parker in Los Angeles, killed her, and delivered her dissected remains to a grief-stricken father, was a sadist. The infamous Baron Gilles Duret, the original Bluebeard, is a perfect example of a sadistic killer. But true sadism is motivated by warped sexual desires, and unless we are willing to believe 11-year-old Chloe possesses the sex development of an adult, this seems a remote possibility. We cannot classify her as a sadist. Thus, the only acceptable theory, if we are to believe Chloe guilty of this destruction, is the Electra complex. To support this belief, we have Chloe's performance during the hours of the tragedy, which she admitted, and her manner of telling the story to authorities. But in a case of this kind, all of the criteria for judging that which we call normal may well be disregarded. Adults who of necessity had to enter the Davis home were sickened by the macabre sight before them. Barton Davis was weeping and hysterical for hours, yet little Chloe had been forced to witness the actual destruction. Consider the profound effect of such a shock upon her emotions. From all the evidence, it appears Mrs. Davis was suffering from the type of insanity we call paranoia. The chief characteristic of this disease is the formation of systematized delusions, with the usual development of a persecution complex. In its second stage, these delusions become more expansive. The patient's ego expands. He becomes a victim of obsessions, morbid impulses, and fixed ideas. In Mrs. Davis, the illness was characterized by her belief in the demons who were pursuing her and members of her family, and by her avowed desire to commit suicide. According to her physician, her physical condition was good, although she was slightly anemic. Her exaggeration of this trouble to the proportions of a serious illness is but another expression of her mental condition. From the paranoiacs come most of the dangerously insane. The murderer of President Garfield was an example of this type. The illness progresses, but it is not easily detected. In this case, there can be certainly no blame attached to Mr. Davis for not recognizing his wife's illness. The doctor who recommended a psychiatrist probably suspected the truth, but Mrs. Davis steadfastly refused to follow his advice. There is a very fine distinction between that which we call normal and that which is abnormal behavior. Earlier in this article, I stressed the importance of Chloe's happy home life. The official inquiry found it hard to accept that part of Chloe's story wherein she admitted striking her mother at her mother's direction. To me, this course of action seems a very logical one. Let's review again the events of that morning. This 11-year-old child opened her eyes on a scene of horror. As she made her way through that house, her emotions were literally bombarded with a series of nerve-shattering discoveries. She lacked the fortitude and experience of an adult, and she was peculiarly vulnerable because unusual things strike with twice the power on the impressionable mind of an adolescent. Long-endured physical sufferings frequently dulls the nerves. We possess compensating powers of adjustment, which permit us to get used to sensory stimulation. I didn't know what was happening. I was in a daze. We are all familiar with such expressions that are used to describe one's reactions and feeling during a crisis when the sensory shock of an experience is too great to be assimilated by the mind. In the aftermath of the Great War, the world came to know a new kind of illness. Most of us have come in contact with victims suffering from shell shock, a manifestation of emotional exhaustion. Sociologists have attempted to explain the brutal crime waves of the 20s as the acts of men whose normal feelings had been dulled by the sight of too much pain and bloodshed. The emotions of that flaxen-haired little girl were completely crushed by the monstrous thing she had witnessed. Her physical body functioned without conscious control. If family life in the Davis home had been unpleasant, had there been any precedent for rebellion, it is possible Chloe would have refused to obey her mother's commands. But for 11 years, under happy circumstances, the child had followed her mother's direction. Although we know she was fond of her father, she was in closer contact with her mother. Mrs. Davis, her mind tortured, her reason gone, completely out of contact with her environment, was still the author of authority and wisdom and judgment in the eyes of that child. Had the shock been of lesser intensity, it is possible the girl would have rebelled. A normal parent under normal circumstances ordering a child of 11 to inflict pain on a pet dog would probably be disobeyed. The child would be able to recognize misdirection in that degree. But a sensitive, intelligent girl, cut off as Chloe was from pleasant realities, with the world she had known completely reversed, confronted with the command which so violently offended her sense of right, would unquestionably cling to the one thing which remained, the voice of authority issuing from a source in which she believed implicitly. If we accept the hypothesis that Chloe is a normal child suffering from a violent emotional shock, which robbed her of the reality to independently express her feelings, then her actions fit neatly into this ghastly picture puzzle of tragedy. Chloe telephoned her father for help. This was blind reflex action. She did not inform him of what had happened over the telephone because her groping mind had not accepted that carnage of blood as a reality. In her statements to the police, Chloe said she dressed, washed, and combed her hair. This was action dictated by habit. Her mind, fighting for understanding, gratefully accepted the release found through the performance of those routine duties. The story of the ambulance driver, which was so shocking to unthinking readers of the newspaper accounts, should be conclusive proof of our theory. Chloe pointed out the bodies of her sisters and brother with no show of emotion because all her emotions had been exhausted by that 2-hour ordeal. Adults frequently shrink from the reality of death. How then can anyone demand that this child should know, recognize, and accept death? These were the bodies of her former playmates, horribly stained and horribly still. Yet the great change in them was beyond the comprehension of Chloe's tormented mind. What is more natural than her statements describing them? One no longer moves, the other moves sometimes. This was a physical description at which she could arrive without accepting the greater transformation. Police professed to be puzzled by Chloe's lack of tears. They accepted the superficial evidence and described her as cold and unemotional. Minor pain brings tears, but even in adults, the finality of death, its incomprehensible mystery, is often too great for an outward show of grief. Tears are futile. That Chloe didn't cry is, again, I think, quite natural. It will be months, perhaps years, before her mind can accept the reality of what happened on that morning. Until it does, and this refusal to accept it is nature's protection, it will remain as the impressions of a dream. Questioned again and again for hours at a time, Chloe repeated her story without any evident strain. One police official remarked that the questionnaires suffered more than she. This again substantiates our theory. It was no burden for Chloe to repeat what she had seen, no more of a task for her than it would be for a more fortunate child to recount the scenes which had passed before her on a moving picture screen. Chloe's only reaction to the questioning was an indignant protest when the truth of her statements was questioned. Her only display of emotion was one of normal affection for her father. She evidenced no ill will towards police officials and doctors who examined her. She sought relaxation in reading while in the custody of the police, and was happy when given some candy. I have not meant to imply that the authorities were unkind or unjust or presuming upon their powers in their investigation of the case, nor do I think they can be blamed for following a course calculated to clarify all the strange aspects of the Davis tragedy. 4 lives were brought to an abrupt and brutal end, and the law prescribes certain duties, makes specific demands of the properly constituted authorities. I doubt if anyone can consider this case without speculating as to what effect the tragedy will have on the future life of the little girl who endured that ordeal. We can only generalize on the answer to that problem. We have seen that so far nature, by relieving her emotions, by robbing her to a great degree of sensory perception, has spared her the agony of reality. We can also believe her mind and body will gradually adjust themselves to the acceptance of what happened. The impressions of that morning will unquestionably remain with Chloe for the rest of her life. Fortunately, our memory of pain is short-lived. We can remember that certain physical injuries were extremely painful, but try as we will, we cannot recall any semblance of the agony we suffered. We can hope this compensating gift of nature will help Chloe in her period of readjustment. Her father, who managed to create a happy home life for his family in spite of his wife's illness, will undoubtedly provide the care and affection Chloe needs. Removed from all contact with physical reminders of the tragedy, she will be able to reorganize her life and develop normally. These unreal hours of agony will become a dim, unreal memory. In the interest of justice, this article would not be complete without including the findings of the coroner's jury, which met in Los Angeles April 10th to fix responsibility for the tragedy. Chloe was cleared completely. End of article. Regarding the name of the psychiatrist, I have not been able to find it online. It may have been a pseudonym, as often was the case with crime magazines of the day. One of the magazines featured an author simply known as the mysterious ex-operative 48. I kid you not. If there was no Dr. W. Henry Messenkopf, I am inclined to think the article was written after someone interviewed an actual psychiatrist regarding their opinion on Chloe. If that's not it, I'd like to think it was written by Dr. Paul D. River, LAPD quasi-psychiatrist, who first alleged the electrocomplex angle. Maybe he changed his mind about Chloe, and the article was his way to make up for it. If I ever find out, I'll add it to the description below, where you can also add a like, which helps others to be able to find this program. Thank you for listening to Part 3, and remember, if you are suffering with mental health issues and are contemplating harming yourself or others, please talk to your doctor or use the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. A story like this should serve as a warning to spouses and partners as well, who should waste no time getting help for someone fixating on death who may not be willing to get it for themselves. But mostly, we remember the tragic and misunderstood 11-year-old Chloe Davis, who adjusted to life, imperfect as the rest of us, changed her name to Bonnie, and left a positive impact on the arts and her family.